Audiobook Academy. Book Summary. King Lear. By William Shakespeare. William Shakespeare's King Lear is a 1605 tragedy. Lear, a pre-Roman Celtic king, is the inspiration for this story. The first performance of the drama took place on the Feast of St. Stephen in 1606. Reconstruction in England led to a less sad conclusion to this story. Most of King Lear's life, he spent engaged in military conflict. He plans to split his kingdom among his 3 daughters when he retires, but he wants to preserve his authority but not the duties that go along with it, so he has this idea. He announces a competition. The best inheritance may go to the daughter who loves him the most. His 2 oldest daughters lavish praise on him with aplomb. Moreover, he savors their sham compliments, but his youngest and most beloved daughter tells him the reality. She adores him in the way a daughter should. He scolds her and deems her unworthy. As soon as Lear hands over the throne to his 2 other daughters, they attempt to seize control of the entire kingdom as well. He begins to lose his sanity as his daughters become crueler to him. He finds himself in the middle of a conflict with France. They were pitted against their father's eldest daughter, who had married France's King Louis XVI. In the end, his oldest daughter murders her middle sister and herself, and his youngest daughter is hanging by that man. Lear suffers a plethora of losses throughout the course of the war despite the fact that the British side ultimately prevails. The drama begins with the Earl of Kent, the Earl of Gloucester, and Edmund, the Earl of Gloucester's stuttering son. Kent interrupts Gloucester's conversation to ask the latter to introduce the latter's kid. In spite of the fact that Gloucester is an unrepentant scumbag, he claims to still love him. This is followed by Lear, the King, Cornwall, the Duke, and Albany, the Duke. Goneril, Regan, and Cordelia, 3 of King Lear's daughters, appear with a slew of servants. King Lear has made the decision to retire from the throne and spend the rest of his days with his daughters. He first asks each of his daughters which one of them loves him the most before deciding how to distribute their inheritance. He intends to provide the most to that daughter. "Sir, I adore you more than words can wield the matter," exclaims Goneril, "and I find she names my very action of love, only she comes extremely short," professes Regan. Regan and Goneril spend numerous lines telling their father how much they love him. Cordelia, on the other hand, informs him that she loves him neither more nor less when he inquires. She also wants to know how her sisters can offer their father all of their affection while they are all married to different men. Isn't it fair that their husbands get half of their affection? Lear is outraged. With little left for Cordelia, he gives Regan and Goneril their share of his realm. "Nothing will arise out of nothing," says the author. Lear is devastated, as he had high hopes for Cordelia and expected her to show him even more affection. However, the king has already made up his mind, and Kent is powerless to change it. Even as longtime servant Kent tries to warn the king that his 2 eldest daughters are plotting to overthrow him, the king grows increasingly enraged. After 6 days, he tells Kent he must leave the realm. As soon as King Lear informed them that not only has he disinherited her, but she lacks any dowry, the Duke of Burgundy decided to withdraw from the race for Cordelia's hand in marriage. Although her honesty intrigues King Louis XIII, he has no intention of being married to her. Without Lear's permission, he hands her over to him. Meanwhile, Regan and Goneril are plotting their revenge. They are well aware that they are in charge of the kingdom, but they intend to usurp the remaining authority of their father. Act 1 Scene 2. The Earl of Gloucester's Castle. Edmund begins the scene by delivering a lengthy soliloquy. Irritated by the fact that his half-brother Edgar is the rightful heir to their late father's estate, his half-brother is bitter. Edmund begins to devise a strategy to assassinate him. By writing a letter in Edgar's handwriting, he begins his fatal pact. Edgar is allegedly planning to assassinate their paternal grandfather, the Earl of Gloucester, according to the letter they received. His father, Edmund's father, sees the note and becomes even more inquisitive. Astonished but enraged, he insists on reading it. After that, Edmund's objective is to inform Edgar that his father is furious with him and that he should bring his sword along as a protective measure. Act 1 Scene 3. The Duke of Albany's Palace. Goneril, King Lear's daughter, is the first person he sees when he retires. She tells her steward, Oswald, that her father's knights are loud and obnoxious, and that she doesn't like them either. With her slaves behaving badly against her father and his soldiers, it appears that she is setting the stage for a showdown with her father. Act 1 Scene 4. A hall in the Duke of Albany's palace. The Earl of Kent shows up at the palace dressed as a farmer named Keyes. Lear falls in love with him because of his honesty and straightforwardness. In order to talk to Goneril about her rowdy servants, Lear asks Oswald where his daughter is so that he might speak with her. Oswald simply walks away from him. He strikes the king when he returns because he is nasty to him. Keyes trips Oswald as he attempts to flee. Oswald is dispatched by Lear to get his daughter. It's now time for the fool to start his performance. In the midst of his lightheartedness, he reminds us that handing over his kingdom to Goneril and Regan was a mistake. Eventually, Goneril makes her way in and notifies her father that his men have been acting in an unruly manner and must leave the room. Lear is surprised. Treating the king with such contempt is an act of treason. Goneril tells him that at least half of his knights will have to be sent away. Refusal: he has 100 knights, yet refuses. On the off chance that Regan is cordial and respectful, Lear goes. He asks Goneril why she was so disrespectful as he leaves. While he's frightened, she assures him that she would write to her sister and beg her father for help. Act 1 Scene 5. Court of Duke Albany's castle. Keyes is summoned by King Lear to convey a message to Gloucester. Foolishly, the fool chastises Lear for handing up the throne to his deceitful daughter. Thinks he'll be treated like Goneril was. It is in the king's prayers that he does not go insane. Act 2 Scene 1. The Earl of Gloucester's castle. Edmund's father's castle is under surveillance by a spy. When will the Duke of Cornwall and his wife, Regan, be arriving? As he informs him, he's also been hearing stories that Cornwall and Albany are feuding. Sneaky, it is not long before Edmund returns to locate his brother, and he lashes out at him for choosing the side of the Duke of Albany in their quarrel, telling him that the Duke of Cornwall is on his way. No one can understand a word Edgar says. To prove their father is on the way, Edmund and Edgar whip out their swords and engage in some savagery. Edgar then takes off running. Edmund cuts his arm with his sword and tells his father that he was trying to protect him from Edgar when he was cut. Before his father comes, Edgar is to be hunted by Gloucester's troops. Upon seeing Cornwall and Regan's arrival, she makes the assumption that Edgar is one of Lear's knights and was therefore persuaded to slay Gloucester by Lear's knights in order to inherit the fortune his father left him. She then asks Gloucester for guidance on how to respond to letters from her father and sister, Goneril, which she has received. Act 2 Scene 2. Before Gloucester's castle. Oswald is the first person Keyes, alias Kent, sees when he arrives at the castle. When Keyes, Kent, gets enraged because of the man's rudeness, he attacks the man. A messenger for the king is being imprisoned by Cornwall, and Gloucester believes that this is an error of judgment. In any case, he was put to death in the stocks. Keyes, Kent, pulls out a letter from Cordelia after everyone has left. It is stated that she intends to work from France to improve the situation in the UK. Act 2 Scene 3. A wood. Edgar has been able to elude authorities. A disguise is the only option he has left. He'll pretend to be Tom, an insane man who's escaped from a mental institution. This happens from time to time, and the people search for food and shelter in the woods. Act 2 Scene 4. Before Gloucester's castle, Keyes, Kent, is in the stocks. Upon arrival, Lear and his fool arrive to the castle with only one knight. He is shocked when he sees Keyes, Kent, in the stocks. Asked who would do such a thing to his messenger, Regan and Cornwall are named. To no avail, they respond to Lear's calls. He suspects that they are claiming to be ill, which may explain why they have acted in such a bizarre manner. Lear tells his daughter about her sister's rudeness when she eventually arrives. Perhaps Regan was right after all. Because he is so elderly and irrational, reconnect with Goneril and ask her forgiveness, she suggests. Lear tells his daughter about her sister's rudeness when she eventually arrives. Perhaps Regan was right after all. Because he is so elderly and irrational, she advises him to seek forgiveness from Goneril by going back to her. In response to Lear's request to be allowed to stay with her, Regan rejects him. He curses Goneril as she appears in the background. Regan knew she was coming, so she and her sister teamed up to take on their father. They describe him as frail and helpless. With one of them, he must give up half of his knights in order to remain in their company. For the sake of his own safety, Regan tells him to keep his 25 servants away from him at all times. Afterward, he informs Goneril that he will reduce his age to 50, but she rejects the offer. She's not going to let him have that many housemates. Though they soon agree that he cannot have any servants, Lear flees in a rage. Gloucester begs his daughters to let him in so he can escape the storm. When you try to enter, they shut you out. Act 3 Scene 1. A heath. In the storm, Keyes, Kent, arrives at the heath looking for Lear. Prior to seeing this knight, however, the king is said to be close by. There was talk in the castle about Albany and Cornwall disputing and France spying on English courts, according to Keyes, Kent. In order to be as close to the French border as possible, Keyes, Kent, sends the knight to Dover, England. Lear will have pals there. To show Cordelia, the knight receives a ring from him. It'll vouch for him and let her know who's in trouble. The search for the king continues as Keyes, Kent, follows the knight out of the room. Act 3 Scene 2. Another part of the heath, the storm still rages. To Kent's relief, the king, Keyes, has finally come face to face with Keyes, Kent. The fool is also present, and he requests that he grovel at the feet of his daughter in order to get entrance into the house. Upon finding them, Keyes, Kent, encourages them to take shelter with him in a nearby hovel. The fool offers a cryptic prediction as they enter the dungeon. When priests are more in word than matter. When brewers mar their malt with water. When nobles are their tailors' tutors. No heretics burned, but wenches suitors. When every case in law is right. No squire in debt, nor no poor knight. When slanders do not live in tongues. Nor cut purses come not to throngs. When usurers tell their gold I the field. And bawds and hoard do churches build. Then shall the realm of Albion come to great confusion. Then comes the time, who lives to see't. That going shall be used with feet. Act 3 Scene 3. Gloucester's Castle. Edmund and Gloucester are conversing. Despite King Lear's daughters and Cornwall's care to him, Gloucester is disturbed. Despite his pleas, they told him he couldn't go out and look for the king in the storm. When they took control of his castle, they told him that he was no longer allowed to talk to the monarch or ask on his behalf. His father, Gloucester, tells his son that Albany and Cornwall are engaged in a war of words. Also, he informs him that the French are on their way. With this information, he must track down the king. When Edmund tells Cornwall where he is heading, Gloucester instructs him to keep it a secret. A letter with information concerning the French invasion lies in Edmund's bedroom, according to him. Edmund had been eagerly awaiting this opportunity. His father and brother are working for King Lear, and he tells Cornwall about the letter from France that he received. Edmund believes he will be the sole heir following the deaths of his father and brother. Act 3 Scene 4. The Heath, before a hovel. However, the king refuses to enter the hovel, and Keyes, Kent, instead spends the time kneeling and pleading with him. Think of the people who don't have any shelter from the weather. He does, however, send the fool inside for safety's sake. After a brief pause, the fool dashes out the door. His pursuers are Tom O'Bedlam, Edgar, who has been pursuing him. It's Edgar, who portrays the insane man. He claims that he is being pursued by demons. Lear inquires as to whether his terrible daughters have also contributed to his downfall. The sanity of King Lear is rapidly eroding. Lear asks Tom, Edgar, what he was like before he became a lunatic. As a courtier, the man claims to have engaged in sex and drinking. After noticing that Tom, Edgar, is completely undressed, Lear decides to do the same. At the end of his search for the gang, Gloucester convinces the king to join him back at the castle. As long as Tom, Edgar, Lear's new pal from the slums, joins him. Act 3 Scene 5. Gloucester's Castle. Edmund is up to more pranks than ever. This scenario features him and Cornwall. In addition to Gloucester's departure, Cornwall learned that the French are approaching and that Cornwall has declared his allegiance to them in a letter that he received from Gloucester. As though Edmund's father's alleged betrayal has repulsed him. However, in reality, he is content. Now he may count on the support of the formidable Cornwall. Cornwall bestows his father's title to Edmund before dispatching him to track for his biological father. As a final nail in the coffin, Edmund expects to find him working for the king. Act 3 Scene 6. A chamber in a farmhouse adjoining the castle. The fool, Keyes, Kent, and Tom, Edgar, visit a little farm home near Gloucester's castle with Gloucester, King Lear, the fool, and Keyes. There, he begs them to wait for him while he goes out to look for food. The sanity of King Lear is slipping away from him. Keyes, Kent, Tom, Edgar, and the fool judge over a fake trial for his daughters. Neither Tom, Edgar, nor the fool, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, speak in a coherent manner. Gloucester will be back soon, and he has some bad news. They want to assassinate the king. He has heard about it. To ensure the safety of the king, he asks Keyes, Kent, to accompany him to Dover, where allies are waiting to help. Tom, Edgar, is left behind as Keyes, Kent, King Gloucester, and the fool depart. Even though King Lear's issues are so great, they appear insignificant to him. Act 3 Scene 7. Gloucester's Castle. Goneril, the wife of Albany, receives a letter from Cornwall informing her of the French presence at Dover. His plot to punish his father and prevent Edmund from being present on it is why he urges him to accompany her. After that, he dispatches a team of armed men to find Gloucester. They learned from Oswald that Gloucester aided the king's escape to Dover. Cornwall and Regan tie Gloucester up after they apprehend him. They call him names and slander him. No one can be killed without a trial, according to Cornwall, but anyone can be tortured. Cornwall rips off Gloucester's eye when he vows to avenge the death of his king. After all, Regan insisted on removing both of her eyes. Gloucester's servant intervenes, declaring that he can no longer stand by and let this happen. After a sword duel, Cornwall is stabbed by the servant. Cornelius is killed by Regan with a sword before he can finish him off. Cornwall then proceeds to amputate Gloucester's remaining eye. Gloucester cries out for Edmund's assistance, but Regan dismisses his pleas, saying that Edmund deceived him in the first place. Gloucester has been sent out of the home by Cornwall and Regan, who are treating his wounds, so that he can find his way to Dover. Before handing him over to the crazed beggar, Tom, Edgar, Gloucester's servants spend time tending to his wounds. Act 4 Scene 1. The Heath. His father Tom, Edgar, is pacing back and forth when an old guy brings him to him. Hearing his father say to the old guy, "I wish I could touch Edgar one last time," Edgar is overcome with emotion and tears. There, he asks the old man for some clothes, and then Tom, Edgar, to guide him to Dover or the top of the tallest cliff. As they approach Tom, Edgar. Act 4 Scene 2. Before the Duke of Albany's palace. Edmund and Goneril arrive at the palace courtyard. She says she was astonished that her spouse didn't join them on the road. When she asks Oswald whether he's delighted the French are coming, he replies that he is glad her husband isn't happy about how she and her sister treated the king, and that Goneril returning is the worse. Her husband is no longer an ally to Goneril, she understands. To prepare for the French, she tells Edmund to return to Cornwall and dispatch his forces. Taking command of her husband's forces, she will meet her husband's men. Oswald will receive messages from her, she says Edmund, and she kisses Edmund goodbye. After this is all over, she suggests to him that she will become his mistress. Albany arrives at Goneril after Edmund has left. She and her sister have enraged him to no end. A coward, she calls him out, before admonishing him to get ready to fight the French. The Duke of Cornwall died from the injuries he suffered when plucking out Gloucester's eyes. As they are bickering, Albany is outraged by Cornwall's treatment of Gloucester and believes it is divine retribution. Her sister is less strong, but Goneril believes Edmund is free to pursue her. She departs to respond to letters from her sister. According to Albany's question, Edmund betrayed his father by leaving the meeting knowing exactly what they were about to do. When Edmund is killed, Albany promises to avenge him and aid Gloucester. Act 4 Scene 3. The French camp near Dover. Keys, Kent, is introduced to a group of French gentlemen at the start of this scene. It is reported to Keys, Kent, that the King and Queen of France have arrived in England, but that the King must leave immediately due to a personal situation back home. He handed command of the troops over to Queen Cordelia. He informs Keys, Kent, that she grieved when she learned of her father's abuse when she got his letters. When the gentleman asks if King Lear is in Dover, Keys, Kent, informs him that he is, but his answer is ambiguous. Also, he's embarrassed to see Cordelia now that he's done what he did to her. It has come to their attention that the armies of Albany and Cornwall are on the move, and they tell him so. Act 4 Scene 4. The French camp, a tent. Cordelia sends her troops to hunt and bring King Lear to her after hearing that he has hid in the cornfields and covered himself in weeds to hide, singing ballads. The chance that he will regain his mental faculties is discussed with a psychiatrist. Upon her request, he provides her with a list of medications that can help the king get some slumber. Cordelia is informed by a messenger that the English are approaching. France's armed forces are ready. Act 4 Scene 5. Gloucester's Castle. In this scenario, Regan and Oswald are conversing. Regan learns from Oswald that Albany's army has finally left. Goneril has proven to be a more capable leader than her spouse. He has a letter from Goneril to Edmund, and Regan wants to know what he has. Despite his refusal, Regan is able to deduce that it's a love letter from Oswald. The widow informs Oswald that she wants Edmund, and that their match would be better because it would not be adultery because she is a widow. When Oswald returns, she offers him a memento from her to present to Edmund. The last thing she says to Oswald is that she would pay him if he kills Gloucester. Act 4 Scene 6. Fields near Dover. Tom, Edgar, leads the way from Gloucester to Dover for Gloucester. He tells the elderly guy that they are on a cliff, despite the fact that they are not, and he can hear the waves crashing. Gloucester begs for pardon, but he is at his wit's end and swears he cannot go on. As a result of his foolish actions, he ends up falling and being unconscious. Edgar claims to be a gentleman who witnessed Gloucester jump over a cliff and survive. A monster is there by his side at the top of the cliff, Edgar informs him, and he must fight it to the death. In the face of the god's choice, Gloucester resolves to accept it and live with the consequences. Wildflower crowns adorn the head of Lear soon afterward. While talking about his sins, he sounds insane. Despite their best efforts, Cordelia's men track down Lear and attempt to bring him to her. They're hot on their tails. Moving on without Edgar and Gloucester by my side. The two are discovered by Oswald, who makes an attempt to assassinate Gloucester in exchange for the money he was promised. Edgar kills Lee Harvey Oswald with a cudgel while pretending to be a strong peasant. Oswald leaves the letters in Edgar's care before he passes away. After reading Goneril's letters, Edgar realizes that she wants Edgar to kill Albany so that they can be together. Angry, Edgar makes a pact with himself that he will deliver the letter to Albany. After that, he buried Oswald and escorted his father away from danger. Act 4 Scene 7. A tent in the French camp. While gentle music plays, we see King Lear dozing off on the bed. Attendees include a gentleman and a few others. King Lear is brought to Cordelia and begs for her forgiveness when he reawakens. Like her sisters, she won't abuse him the way she mistreated her sisters. Once they learn that Cornwall has been killed, they begin to panic. Act 5 Scene 1. The British camp, near Dover. To begin, Regan questions Edmund about whether or not he's been with her sister recently. If he loves her, she wants to know. Both of these questions he denies. Goneril and Albany have arrived. According to Albany, Lear and others who have valid grievances with the French are on the French side, as are others who are. That's not to say he won't take on Edmund, Regan, or Goneril. Goneril and Regan are unable to let Edmund alone since they both desire him. The three of them depart together, but Edgar, posing as a peasant, stops Albany from departing. Albany receives the letter he received from Lee Harvey Oswald, which he hands to her. As soon as the struggle is over, instructs him to call out for help, and he'll be there in an instant to help. Edmund returns and tells Albany that the war is nearing its conclusion. Edmund then takes the stage to address the crowd. This man claims that after the struggle is done, he will resolve the issue of his feelings for both ladies. Goneril has the ability to kill Albany if she so chooses. And if Britain triumphs, he will not be merciful if he takes Lear and Cordelia. Act 5 Scene 2. A field between the two camps. Meanwhile, Edgar abandons Gloucester to join the combat by hiding under a tree. He returns soon and tells his father that the Brits had triumphed against the Germans. Cordelia and Lear have been apprehended. It's also Gloucester's goal to get captured there. Edgar, on the other hand, persuades him that his moment has yet to come. Act 5 Scene 3. The British camp near Dover. Cordelia and Lear are being held captive by Edmund. Edmund orders a guard what to do with her sisters, and they are taken away from her. Here come Albany, Goneril, and Regan. But Edmund tells them that he's sent the inmates away. Regan declares Edmund her husband, despite the fact that she isn't feeling well. Goneril, Edmund, and Albany are confronted by Albany on the note and Edmund is challenged. In order to summon his champion, Albany makes a loud noise with his horn. Edgar enters the room clad in heavy armor. Edgar defeats Edmund in a savage battle of wits and strength. Then he makes his identity known to the world. He informs them that when he revealed his true identity to his father, the old man died ecstatic and bereaved. A bloodied knife is swung into the room. That Goneril poisoned Regan and killed herself is what he tells them. In the meantime, Kent appears and asks for Lear. Edmund, who Albany requested Edgar leave alive for questioning, is the subject of their inquiry. After apologizing for his many transgressions, he confesses to them that he had ordered Cordelia's execution. He sent a messenger right away to intervene and halt the execution. Cordelia's corpse is carried by Lear as he enters. The messenger was too late, and he has gone insane as a result of his inability to get the message out on time. Edmund is dead, according to a messenger. When Lear thinks he sees Cordelia take a breath, he dies after asking Edgar to loosen her button. In Albany, Kent and Edgar are given back their titles. Kent declines Edgar's offer since he's too exhausted to continue on. While the funeral march is playing, the surviving actors file off the stage. King Lear. King Lear has spent his life at war. He is Britain's king and an extremely powerful person. Neither fear nor love have ever faced Lear. In reality, he doesn't know what true love is. Retiring kings often consider ways to keep their positions of authority while abdicating their duties. He intends to divide his empire among his daughters, but he turns it into a competition to see which one of them loves him the most in the end. He accepts the flattery of his two oldest daughters, but not the honesty of his youngest daughter. As the reality dawns on him, he begins to lose his sanity and his kingdom as well. Cordelia, King Lear's youngest daughter. She's not as eager to extol her father's virtues as her sisters are. Because she is open and honest with him, she incurs his fury. The King of France is forced to marry her over her father's disapproval because of her integrity. Forgiving her father for his abuse, the Queen of France leads her soldiers into combat. Goneril, King Lear's oldest daughter. She's abrasive and lusty for power. In order to be with her lover, she planned to assassinate her husband, the Duke of Albany, and steal his army. She is a vicious, shrewd, and morally depraved person. After proclaiming her undying love for her father, she mentally tortures him. As a final act, she poisons her sister Regan before turning the gun on herself when she learns that her husband is aware of her plot to have him killed in order to be with Edmund. Regan, King Lear's middle daughter. The Duke of Cornwall's wife is named after him. She is just as cruel and bloodthirsty as Goneril. Afterward, she and her husband kill the defender of an elderly guy who had his eyes gouged out by her husband. She and Goneril compete for their father's kingdom, attempting to outdo each other with hollow flattery, and they compete for the affections of Edmund. After the death of the Duke of Cornwall, Regan makes him her husband. Edmund, the villain in the play. The Earl of Gloucester's son is a scumbag. When it comes to the inheritance, even though he is loved by his father, he wants it all. However, Edgar, the legitimate son, will be the one to inherit. Edmund devises a plot to discredit his half-brother and have him executed, most likely by their father, by discrediting him. Afterwards, he allows his father to be abused. Ultimately, he's to blame for the deaths of all three of the girls. He dies following a sword fight with his half-brother. As he nears the end of his life, he tries to remorse his actions. Edgar, the legitimate son of the Earl of Gloucester. Edgar is an intelligent young man who has a strong sense of self-confidence. For now, he's hiding out in the woods while the situation is examined. Tom, the crazy beggar, is his guise. Later, he takes on the personas of a gentleman and a peasant. Finally, he disguises himself in a suit of armor to confront his half-brother, Edmund. William Shakespeare was not raised in poverty. He was the son of a glovemaker and a wealthy landowner in 1564. As a young man of means, he went to an excellent school and mastered all the fundamentals. In spite of this, studying all of the great playwrights drew me to the theater. Having 8 siblings and being the oldest surviving son, he would not have been expected to pursue a career in theater, but Shakespeare was a bit of a rebel and took his own path. He married Anne Hathaway, a 26-year-old actress, when he was just 18 years old. They welcomed their first child, Susanna, into the world 6 months later. Judith and Hamnet, their twins, were born and lived to be 11 years old before Hamnet tragically lost his life. Most academics believe that their marriage was not very pleasant. His second-best bed was the sole thing he left to his wife in his will, which he wrote just days before his death. It doesn't matter if his marriage was perfect or not, his success as a playwright, director, producer, and actor in plays was undeniable. In 1592, when Shakespeare was 28 years old, he had already made enough progress in his career to land a place on the bill at a London theatre. Only Lord Chamberlain's Men, a rising London troupe, performed his pieces just 2 years later, in 1594. His patron was Queen Elizabeth I until her death in 1603. Despite the fact that she had never seen his theatre, she was a huge admirer of his work and he and his group performed for her at the palace. The troupe's name was changed to the King's Men after the death of his heir, King James I. It was a great success for the Lord Chamberlain's Men and the King's Men to be popular and successful. London's Globe Theatre was built in 1599, and in 1608 they purchased the Blackfriars Theatre, which was destroyed by fire in 1613 and rebuilt in 1614. The outbreak of the English Civil War forced the closure of both theatres in 1642. The authenticity of some of Shakespeare's plays is debated, but the man is responsible for some of the greatest plays ever written. These include The Comedy of Errors, Richard III, Shrew's Tale, As You Like It, Romeo and Juliet, and Julius Caesar, which is based on Plutarch's parallel lives, translated into English by Sir Thomas North in 1579, according to rumor. Shakespeare frequently appeared on stage in his own plays as an actor. The ghost of Hamlet's father and Adam in As You Like It are among the roles he is rumored to have played. Ben Jonson's plays include Every Man in His Humor and Sejanus His Fall, among others, in which he appears on the cast lists. Shakespeare's life revolved around the stage. From the design of the building to the selection of props, he was involved in every step of the process. Even when the theatres in London were closed due to the bubonic plague epidemics in the years between 1603 and 1610, he continued to write and work. Then, on the 23rd of April in 1603, the world lost one of the greatest playwrights of all time, supposedly after a drinking spree. A month previous, he had just been 52 years old and had just signed his will. He had 2 daughters who were married and a wife who survived him. He left the bulk of his money and property to his oldest daughter, Susanna, with the caveat that it be delivered to the first son of her body. She had 3 children who never married, and he had 1 kid, Judith, who also never married and had children of her own. As a result, Shakespeare's legitimate line came to an end as well. However, he will not be remembered for that. Shakespeare's plays continue to be performed all over the world to this day. His plays have been one of history's most powerful unifiers. A single line from his plays may be recited by practically everyone, from dictators and saints to professors and dunces. Good friend, for Jesus' sake forbear / to dig the dust confined here / Blessed be the one that saves these stones, / and cursed be he that disturbs my bones is the epitaph on his gravestone at Holy Trinity Church. It was decided that his burial would be left untouched throughout the 2008 church repair project. Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button for more content like this. See you in next video.